Hello, friends, and welcome to Module Tool, where we're going to talk about contingency planning and crisis communication. During these online modules, I will be giving a much longer lecture over the video and linking it on our Canvas website for you to be able to refer to this source of information along with weekly lecture notes and textbook readings. I'll also be referring to some of my own notes in these longer videos, so if I pause or look down for a moment, that is what I'm actually doing. When we talk about contingency planning, we're really talking about the management of risk. And when we talk about risk and crisis communications in general, there's three main phases that we've begun to talk about: the pre-crisis, the crisis, and the post-crisis. Now, every organization is going to be facing risk at some point, whether it has to do with nature, technology, or human beings. And so it's a matter of preparing for the risk that they're going to face. Contingency planning is simply situational planning that links to the risk that an organization is going to face. We also want to think about the crisis preparedness related to the risk that they're going to face. Now, we can think of many different sorts of examples, but when we assume risk is going to happen, we want to automatically assume that we need strong relationships between an organization and its publics. This is the key point of public relations in general, brought forth by the definition of PR, but also specifically related to crisis communication. This is among the most important things that an organization can bring to the forefront. This starts with the management of the flow of information, which is the basis of communications and the basis of stakeholder management. When you get into a crisis and you're managing risk, you do not want the first time that you're initiating outreach or an ask or a response to a stakeholder to be during the crisis. So part of crisis communication and risk preparedness, and therefore contingency planning, is to build two-way symmetrical relationships with your audiences way ahead of time. Now, when we think about the pre-crisis phase as well, we want to think about the essentials that we need to bring to the table. We want to assume that crisis communication is going to need to take effect some point in an organization's existence. So, assuming that this comes to the forefront, we need to be able to have many stakeholders involved internally. So that includes an executive owning up to what's going on, the board of the organization being involved, truth being told, which we'll get to in a few minutes about media relations, and all of the collateral that you're going to prepare for dissemination across your constituencies. Just a moment as I pull up a document for myself here. So when we, again, assessing the risk, we want to assess all areas of vulnerability, and we want to assign crisis alert teams. We've begun to talk about this a little bit, but this not only includes a spokesperson, but this begins to include a team that is in charge of contingency planning. So they are assessing risk in a constant way of what the organization could face, and they're also preparing for the unexpected situations. So let's just say we're a technology company and we can't predict necessarily a natural disaster that's going to occur, but we can prepare for a disaster that could occur that could take out all our technology access and lines. That would be an example of something that we not necessarily are going to know about, but there's a situation where we could prepare a response and also an internal addressing of it. We want to designate a crisis media center. We'll get, again, in a couple of minutes to the media relations. We want to conduct the necessary fact-finding, right? So we want to understand where we would go, who we would talk to, what are the actual centers of information that we would need, and how are we going to report on that? The ability to quickly respond. So this is, again, the crisis management team. And to be able to take immediate action and to keep a record or a log of actually what's happening in a crisis. So let's say that our crisis is here, okay? Media relations is a very important part of crisis communication, in which you're really aiming to speak with a single voice, to speak accurately, and to address the key stakeholders. Now, I want to say that media relations is a part of public relations. It's a key part of crisis communications public relations, specifically because you are trying to maintain a reputation during the crisis phase and the post-crisis phase. Specifically, though, you're trying to maintain the value of your organization and the relationship with those stakeholders. So this is even more pertinent and heightened in a crisis communication, that you have preemptive strategies to execute during a crisis, as we've addressed. Now, in that media relations, you want to already have those relationships built, like we said, but you want to have collateral ready. You want to have statements. You want to have key contacts lists. You want to have internal memos and communications that you're able to distribute to your stakeholders, of employees, of board members, of investors, of volunteers. This is a real big problem for organizations when they hit a crisis phase that they don't address internally. And we'll see this throughout our course this semester, in that some employees don't know what's going on, right? So if they go home to their families or their communities, you have thousands of these people, you start to create a ripple effect of a much more serious a much more serious situation of a crisis. So we're at the media relations addressing of this, and because it's such a big part of the public relations crisis process, you really want to be hitting this on the nose. You want to be truthful. Don't say things that are untruthful. If you don't know something, say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Do the research. As a crisis communicator, you need to be prepared for all questions. And that takes preparedness. That's the crisis management team. Crisis management and crisis communications are linked, but they're not the same thing. So when organizations, central officers are preparing for crises, crisis communications are a part of this. But as communicators and practitioners, we need to be able to get a central seat at the table, which is a real battle in the industry. From my experience and studies, this is a key component of public relations study, is where's the central communications officer. Another topic for another day. But we really want to be able to say it accurately, to say it fast. We'll see a lot of crises cases that we address. The crises are not addressed in a direct manner quickly. And so that leaves a gap of assuming things could happen, or assuming what happened. The case this week, you'll see that Tylenol did a really great job of recalling all of their products, of complete image restoration in the post-crisis phase. This is a really exemplary case. I'm giving a little bit away of your discussion, but a really exemplary case of how you would address it, not only operationally, like we've talked about a little bit last week in defining a crisis, but also reputationally, right, or the paracrisis. And so these are two different situations. Right now, we're more talking about the reputation management. Okay, let me see if we missed anything that we wanted to address. So I think we hit all the key points of what we wanted to talk about this week for the oral lecture. Please be sure to review the notes on crisis communication. There's 2 lecture review notes, and this really goes a little bit just deeper in text in terms of the contingency planning and the crisis communication, in terms of what is risk management, why are we managing risks as crisis communicators, how would you go about that in terms of forming those teams, addressing those teams, what is the diversity of a crisis communication team, and then how would you actually go after some of these media relations. The case this week is Johnson & Johnson, the Tylenol case. I think it's really intriguing, and please be sure to respond to the discussion questions as well. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out, but enjoy this week of the online module. Thanks, everybody.